Today we have the great honor of having Avri Doria, and I'll read her bio in a couple of seconds, and she'll be talking about multi-stakeholderism. Avri right now. So there we go. So let me just start off with, Avri is an independent research consultant. She's based in Hope neighborhood of Providence, Rhode Island. I think it's called the Plantations of Rhode Island.
The full state name is State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, though we do have an item on the ballot to change our name again this time around.
Okay. It's a long name. It's the only state I know of that has that elaborate name. That's sort of historic. It'd be a shame to.
Longest name, smallest state.
Great. She has served at the UN Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation. It's called the WGEC. You probably have seen it in the section already. And the UN Working Group on Internet Governance, the WGIG. As a member of the Internet Governance Forum IGF Secretariat, and later was a member of the IGF Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the IGF MAG. As a technologist, she has been involved in the development of Internet protocols and architecture over 30 years. She's also co-chair of the Internet Research Task Force, the IRTF, Research Group on Human Rights Protocol Considerations, HRPC, and a member of the Internet Research Steering Group, IRSG. She has also been active in Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, ICANN policy, and the chair of the GNSO and its council, and currently is a standing member of the ICANN board. Let me welcome Avri. Thank you so much for coming today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. And hello to all of you that are here and all of you that may be listening later. So I was asked to do this, and I was asked to sort of look at actors. I normally speak of them as participants, but actors was a fine term, and I'm not particularly fussy about terms normally. So I wanted to try and situate the actors within this thing we're calling multi-stakeholderism. And probably to Bill's great relief, I'm not going to talk about the ism that much, though I do want to. A lot of people hate the word. A lot of people, despise its meaning. Some people just hate the word. I hate the fact that I can't type it without switching around letters, and it's too many letters for me to type it correctly. So in most of my work, I use M17M, borrowing on some of the I-13 and internationalization history, and I find it much easier to keep that going. So I figured that it's always a chance for me to also introduce numeronyms to people. People keep complaining about acronyms, so perhaps we should try more numeronyms. But anyhow, when I'm talking about, and please interrupt me anytime, however it is done procedurally here, that I think of multi-stakeholderism as the study and practice of forms of participatory democracy. And I don't go much further than that at this point. Now, I've spent a lot of my time in the practice. Basically my whole career has been spent in some form of participatory group, things that weren't called multi-stakeholder when I was originally doing them, and now often are. But I've also, in the last couple of years, been trying to study it and been trying to dig down deeper. So while presented with this opportunity, I thought I would try and take a look at the multi-stakeholder model. And if we can go to the second slide, in a slightly different sense. Now, in the readings, there's a good picture. Or do I change the slide? No, I can't change the slide. Somebody else has to change the slide. Anyhow, in the reading, there's a fairly decent picture of one way of framing the multi-stakeholder models, and it shows many organizations, and it shows their mission. Really would help if I could get the second slide. Thank you. And hopefully you can see it. So anyhow, M14R, another numeronym for multi-stakeholder. If I was really better at typing, I might not have resorted to such numeronyms. But what I decided to try and look at is component aspects of models. In other words, one of the things we've finally gotten over in a lot of our discussions is that there is only one multi-stakeholder model. There is only one way of doing multi-stakeholderism. And having been involved in ISOC, IETF, IRTF, IGF, ICANN, and even ITU, that all try to say in some sense that they're being multi-stakeholder, I sort of figured I wanted to dive a little deeper and sort of look at what that meant. You know, what does it mean to say you're multi-stakeholder? If, for example, I treat it as an identity statement, that if an organization tells me it's being multi-stakeholder, unless it's outright lying, then I really need to look at it and sort of say, well, what do they mean by it? And do they mean the same things that other people mean by it? What are the ways I can look at component aspects of the model? Now, there are certainly ways, and one of the ones we do a lot in ICANN is, you know, and elsewhere, is look at diversity. You know, the diversity of people is what defines the multi-stakeholder model, or its mission, you know, and the fact that different organizations have different models is one of the ways of doing it. I'm at the moment sort of paying attention to three other components of it. And one of the ones I brought in was obviously actors, since that was the subject. Am I talking too fast first? I should make sure. You know, since that's the focal point of today, and really I'm hoping most of our time is going to be spent not with me doing a lecture, because I really only have 2 or 3 slides here, but I really wanted to sort of frame things. Okay, so one of the first things that I've noticed when I've started looking at organizations that identify themselves as multi-stakeholder is sort of what I'm calling the orientation. At its simplest, it's the bottom-up and the top-down variations. Now, one of the things I don't get into here, of course, is every top-down organization eventually has some feedback from the bottom. So really, in any of these orientations, there really is a looping of some sort that goes on from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. In a bottom-up organization, does that mean, for example, that every good idea has to start out as a grassroots notion from the bottom? And is there no room for ideas from further up the process? Or if there are, is there a loopback process that makes that work? And finding many varieties of that. So I've certainly kept this slide simple, but basically, whether something is bottom up or top down, really what its orientation is, really does affect the kind of multi-stakeholder model that it develops. And even within a lot of organizations, you'll find that they're mixed. They may have some processes that are bottom up, but then all of a sudden other processes that are top down. And sort of almost the impedance mismatch sometimes in an organization between when it's acting in a top-down manner and when it's acting in a bottom-up manner is sometimes a real point of contention and a point for study. So that's one part of sort of any of these equations. Going to the other side, there's this notion that comes out a lot, came out in the WSIS's Tunis agenda, has always been a problem when working with UN organizations, is division of roles and responsibilities. There are deciders and there are those who contribute. There are those that make recommendations. There are those that give advice. Those two terms show up a lot when you're talking about the ICANN model, where we have, you know, supporting organizations, SOs that recommend, and we have the advisory committees that give advice. Now, even though in your in your dictionary, I forgot the second word that goes with Miriam, but anyway, dictionaries, you'll find that recommend and advice are pretty much the same word. They mean pretty much the same. But when you get into organizations like ICANN that pay special attention to a difference between recommend and advice, you see that they're really, in a sense, almost opposite sides of a coin, or perhaps just different ways of looking at the architectural structure of an organization. Now, this circle could be far denser with, number of things, what is it between recommendation and decision? There's analysis. There's many different roles with many different responsibilities, but trying to keep these drawings. What's interesting, I found, though, in almost no organization is the role of an actor the same at all levels of the process. In some, they may be contributors at some point and totally absent at another. In some, they may be contributors at one point, but deciders at another. And also, when you look at an organization and you start breaking down its component parts, you often find you come to what I tend to think of as multi-stakeholder all the way down. In other words, just because a top organization is multi-stakeholder doesn't necessarily mean that its component parts are, but they could be. Likewise, if a component part of an organization is a multi-stakeholder group, that doesn't mean that the organization it's situated in is necessarily multi-stakeholder. So in doing an analysis of a multi-stakeholder, it's important not only to look at the roles and responsibilities, but it's important to look at how they might change at different phases of a project, how they might change depending upon the depth you go in the organization. And then finally, I get to the actors in the middle. Now, when I look at stakeholders, they have been, categorized, subdivided in many different ways. In internet governance at the moment, we're sort of stuck in this model of what I call the Tunis agenda +1, where there's governments, private sector, civil society, plus the technical community and maybe academia, which are really in Tunis agenda meant to be cross-cutting, but at least the technical community has become, an equivalent when you look at like the IGF and such, you find that the IGF has really accepted them as a fourth stakeholder. So you have what I call the Tunis agenda. You have the ICANN kind of matrix design, and I have a picture of it from a previous presentation that we can go to after this, just to show what I mean. That, is the SOAC structure, where we have supporting organizations that are limited, for the most part, to just making recommendations on a particular topic. Their recommendations are constrained to those topics, whether it's names, numbers, or names, numbers, or rather generic names, country code names, or addresses. Those are the three. And when you're a recommender, you sort of have a special bylaw status in that those things that you recommend have a certain bearing on how the board treats them. They can't be ignored. They can't be, easily voted down. They need to be treated with a certain perspective. Then you have the, I wasn't ready to go to this one yet, please, but I'll get to it. Or I'll talk about this one now, since I am talking about this, and then I can go back to the other one. So in this one, and this is when I describe the ICANN multi-stakeholder model, I basically look at it using the metaphor of woven materials, where you basically have the warp, The warp is what basically provides the stability, the ongoing fabric nature of a piece of cloth. In other words, without the warp to hold the fabric together, there basically, isn't any continuity to it. And then there's the weft, and that's all the pretty colors and the different things you use to make the design. It's the two of these together that make a solid fabric, in that you have the advisory committees, which are pretty much responsible for sort of maintaining the focus on a particular point of view, of the point of view of stability and security, the point of view of users, the point of view of governments. Whereas you have the weft, which is basically the policies that are being made, that basically give you the picture of what is the organization, what is it's doing, at the time I did this, I had no idea where board and staff fit into this picture. I think I did these 6 years. I wasn't on the board yet either. At the moment I figured out the staff is the weaver. I'm still not sure of what I would say the board was in this model, but perhaps I'm going too far with the model. So, but basically, and as it's probably obvious, I tend to look at sort of other things in existence, other artifacts and such, to try and give patterns. And I've used this model for sort of understanding. One of the questions I've often gotten in terms of ICANN is, what is the difference between SOs and ACs? Why are they different? Why are they not the same? Shouldn't they all be the same? And basically, I argue that the way it was architecturally designed, whether it needs to be this way and whether it'll be this way for all time, basically by creating these two types of organization that work together, that have interweaving interests and interweaving discussions, you actually end up with a much more solid fabric than it could if you just had one group doing it all. If just the GNSO worried about everything instead of just the generic, the work gets diffused, it gets more confusing, etc. If we can go back to my previous slide, and then we can go back and forth. And at the moment, I'm talking longer than I expected to, and I probably should read all of Bill's comments. But if I can go back to my previous one. The last thing I wanted to talk about in the stakeholder model is, among the stakeholders, we really, the first two ways I've talked about them, I've defined them in terms of groups. In the Tunis agenda +1, we have, okay, page 2, please. Sorry to do this to you, Glenn. You basically have defined units, defined groups that are the stakeholders. Likewise, in the ICANN type of model, you basically have groups, and these groups often have groups within them. At large has the RALOs, the GNSO has stakeholder groups, which sometimes have constituencies in them, etc. That basically, and it almost becomes, wow, it's fun to watch this being drawn on. It almost becomes something that I've started to call multi-stakeholder groupism, which is an even harder word than multi-stakeholderism. But you also have groups like the IETF and others that work on the notion of individual stakeholders. And basically, while the IETF doesn't necessarily call itself a multi-stakeholder organization, it is, in my view. It's composed of individuals. They come from every possible conceivable stakeholder group. They participate as individuals, though each of them does have affinities to their neighborhood, to their employer, to their nation, to what have you, but they act and present as individuals. Yet what they achieve is some notion of that participatory democracy. So when looking at the actors in any of the organizations, it's really important to understand the environment they exist in, the orientation they're working in, the orientation that they're working in a particular phase of a project, and the roles and responsibilities that they may have in terms of those roles. And you can really only understand an actor's perspective, an actor's opportunities, an actor's, what it is an actor can actually do when you understand these other component aspects. And that was pretty much the shaping I wanted to put on it. I wasn't sure whether people were going to want to ask me specific things about ICANN or about any of the other groups that I've been involved in. But let me look at Bill's comments while I'm at it. And okay, first says the challenge I see with the multi-stakeholder model is that to be anything like democracy, it assumes a level playing field, which isn't always present. I'm not sure what democracy is present in either. But yes, I've often said that, just like Churchill with, democracy being a poor model, but it's the best we've got. And I sort of say that same notion, and I borrowed that from someone else, applies here. It is an approach. We don't all exist at the same level, but we also don't really have defined levels. And if you look at the whole roles and responsibilities, you look at the phases of projects, and you find out that there are many ways for compensating and for basically dealing with what may seem like power and level disparities. I think that once you're in the room and such, the level differences tend to make a lot less difference because you do get to participate. But perhaps that's a perspective of mine. But I've certainly never found a democracy where I thought we were all on a level playing field. And I don't know whether you're a USan or from another country, but certainly if you're in the US at the moment, to believe that we've got a level playing field would be a challenge. And then I have, for example, in ICANN, most of the participants are volunteers who, if they're not retired, have day jobs. But for the participants presenting the registered registrars working in ICANN, is their day job? Yes and no. And that's it's something that's often said and has been said for years. I certainly know from a lot of people that work in the registries and registrars, a lot of what they do is not their day job. It is part of their day job. They're given time to go do it, but they spend their night hours, they spend their weekend hours being just as much volunteer as anyone else. I think sometimes when we're so certain that some of us are volunteers and some aren't, we lose. We almost have a prejudicial view. I think also among the volunteers, many are paid professors. Many work for outfits like APC, or Article 19, where perhaps one of your assignments is to pay attention to ICANN. And you do that as part of your job. Now, you end up spending far more time volunteering on it when you're doing the work, but you also get some compensations for what you're doing. There are some pure volunteers. I was certainly a pure volunteer in ICANN for probably my first 10 years, and it was all done inside and outside of my work, but it was done because I valued it. And I never felt I was on an unlevel playing field for some reason. Perhaps that's my own delusion, but I always felt that as long as I found the right approach, the right way to approach things and such, I could pretty much be anyone's equal if that's really what I wanted to be. I've also found out that volunteering to take the pen early on something gives you an immense amount of power. So whatever power you find, but yes, another image I use, and forgive me if I go too far on it, is I look at the difference in fire departments in a big city where they're professionals and in a small town where it's community volunteers. But in a sense, they're both firefighters. They're both got the capacity and the will. It's just, why do you do it? Do you do it because you're paid, or do you do it because it's the most important thing to you in the world, and therefore you're going to do it? And getting paid is necessary, but not sufficient for your life. So I'm actually very careful when I approach that notion. And even though I've never been a registrar or registry, though I did work briefly for some registries as a consultant, there's a lot of volunteer time going in from those folks too. And so I wouldn't be as certain about that difference, but I'm open to the discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to try, because we're still getting used to this tool, I'm going to unmute Bill to see if Bill, do you have audio now? Okay. I think I go ahead, Bill.
Once I unmute myself, yeah. I am basing this mostly on what I've seen because I've been working on one of the working groups for the internationalization of domain names. There are 7 of us, of whom 4, maybe 5, work for registries, for contracted parties. And when we're talking about restrictions on what is allowed in domain names and what constitutes a security risk, overwhelmingly, if you work for a registry or a registrar, in my observation, you say, well, we'll just let anything go through, and that has obvious financial implications because you can sell defensive registrations or bad actor registrations. It's all money coming in. Whereas those who don't work there are taking a more conservative view and saying we don't want these things that nobody can tell apart to be allowed through, because that's going to cause DNS abuse of one kind or another. Now, a lot of those people, I really admit, are acting in good faith and doing the best they can. It's just their perspective is a little different. And frankly, there are occasionally cases where that good faith even has to be somewhat in doubt. But anyway, that's basically where I'm coming from on this.
Okay, I understand.
I would also note in passing, the ICANN board has 19 members. 5 represent registries or registrars. 1 represents the end users. Just as an observation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, actually, more could if the NOMCOM were to pick more end user representatives, but up to 5 can actually represent. I mean, up to 6, and but I think one of the things is certainly you're mentioning what is kind of key in a stakeholder multiplicity, is that coming from those different perspectives. And I'm not sure that really necessarily indicates that they're working at a different level or that they've got fewer disadvantages. They certainly do have a commercial perspective. And certainly when I look at the GNSO, there's 3 stakeholder groups that are business oriented, and one of them that is not-for-profit oriented, non-profit oriented. And so again, you'll find those infinity imbalances, and by no means am I here to say that ICANN is perfectly balanced in all of its interests. But what I'm saying is that they represent a set of interests, and there may be more of them, and that's something that, you know, people. That's one of the reasons in ICANN there's often discussions about. We really need to go through a restructuring process. We've been in this model, and I'm not advocating it, of course, here as a board member. Whenever I'm talking about anything from ICANN, it's purely my personal opinion. I do not speak for the board at any point in any way. But going beyond that, you know, there's many people that sort of say, as you've done, perhaps, that the structure is not fair, and that the structure gives more emphasis to one type of affinity over another type of affinity, and that isn't fair. And so that certainly is an important consideration. But I don't know that that gives them a particular advantage when it comes to making a final recommendation, when it comes to such. But, you know, I've always found that to sort of rely on the dynamics of the group, how many hard workers there are in it, who volunteers to take the pen, who's the last to fall apart by you know, consensus by exhaustion. So you know, but
Okay, I think Bill has a response on
okay,
that.
I'm sure he does. Yeah.
Okay, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah. As I say, I have one group that I've been involved with for the past 4 or 5 years on this. We've got 7 members. 4 I know, and possibly a 5th one represent registries, and decisions are taken by 5 out of 7. That's yes, we have a couple of us who are not from registries who can provide a perspective, but as far as making decisions, sometimes it feels very much like we're window dressing. Thank you.
Okay, I understand, and perhaps that group does indeed have an imbalance, but I don't know that it reflects on the whole model, and that group has been going at it for a long time may indeed be an issue that needs looking into. Is it restricted that there can only be 7 people, or is that just the way it came about?
That's the way it came about. I don't know how we went about recruiting people.
Okay. I don't particularly know, you know, it's not a group I followed. I follow a lot of the groups inside ICANN, both in the GNSO and in the at-large and elsewhere, but that's not one I've ever followed. And of course, that topic, the DNS abuse topic, is one of our most volatile at the moment because of its implications and its importance to just about every one of the stakeholders in different ways. So, you know, I'm certainly not going to, you know, contradict, you know, your viewpoint of that particular group, but I don't think that it is an example that sort of shows that therefore the model can't work. Now, I'm unabashed about being a champion for the model, but I'm also, you know, not at all a believer that it all is right in the world and that it can't be improved, it can't be fixed, it doesn't have, you know, issues along it all the way. I just don't know of a better way at the moment, so all I can focus on is how do we improve what we've got? How do we make it work better? How do we deal with issues like yours? Now, one of the things is, fortunately, any recommendations that come out of there go to a public comment, and also if it's following the sort of principles that are laid down elsewhere, those who don't get the decisions their way have the privilege of attaching those minority reports. Now, some people scoff at them, But from my perspective on the board, we have spent weeks and months basically delving through those and making sure that nothing, prejudicial, nothing problematic, nothing against the public interest. The public interest always being one of our key touchstones has fallen through the cracks. So even at that point, you do have a strong vehicle for saying, I've worked in the group, they're good people, they had good reasons, but I disagree with them 100%, and I believe that their decision is dangerous because. And that opportunity remains. And that's an opportunity that really doesn't exist in most forms of, for example, representative democracy, where once I elect you, I've got nothing to say about you until the next time I get to vote. And that's the end of the day. Whereas in a multi-stakeholder model, even when you're in a frustrating position, you've got tools, you've got avenues you can take, you've got people you can bring in new blood sometimes, you can bring in new perspectives, new arguments. So I guess I just maintain my faith that even if there's a bad example, it's not a counterexample to the whole model. But I do understand that there are problems with it.
Let me just interject on this, and I do understand where Bill is coming from. One of the things that they did a number of years ago in where I live in Ontario, Canada, they had I guess you would call socialist government in Ontario during a pretty serious recession, but they tried to broach this issue of giving voice to different groups, people of poverty and different minority groups, and so that they actually got their opinions expressed. And what they did is they actually paid people as interveners. So a person who their entire life they worked as an advocate for, say, people of poverty, or somebody who's an advocate for the Indigenous community, the First Nations in Canada, and other groups. So they actually were at the table with other people who are decision makers. And this is, I think, probably one of the big problems that I think a lot of people see. ICANN or other organizations, they're dominated by special interest groups, by industry, by people who have the good fortune of being, having a great pension when they retire, and what am I going to do with my time? And so, I brought this stuff up, and Bill knows this within the at-large community. How do you recognize people's volunteer time? Volunteer Canada and other things in the States have given a dollar number to the volunteer time you put in. Some people take great offense when they say, oh, you can't value the person. But if you don't put value in the time that you're putting in, it's disregarded. So do you have any opinions on this? Because I may be rambling a bit, but I'm trying to get to a point that I think we need some system in place so people from emerging countries that are actually at the table as well. I think it's maybe the fellowship probably doesn't cut it enough. It's nice, but I don't think it's giving them a seat at the table. So back to you, Avri.
Yeah, well, certainly, I believe in terms of looking at ICANN that we do have many types of people at the table. As I said, my first 10 years, I was not getting anything. I was an independent contractor working on UN stuff. And this was all extra for me. And at my billing rates, I decided that I had invested about, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million worth of my contract time to ICANN at that point. And I personally saw it as an investment on my part. It was something I believed in. It was something I therefore gave the time to. And believe me, I'm not a rich person and did not have a pension. I'm on the work till you drop pension program. But I still see this as being a volunteer fireman. where I think that the work that it's doing is so important that we have to be at the table, and it is for us to volunteer. And I do believe that over the years we have seen the volunteers at ICANN make, fairly large strides. I'll grant you that registries and registrars do have a financial barrier to overcome. It's a very interesting organization in that while it's not a regulator, what regulatory function it may have is all done through contracts. And it's perhaps more in that particular part of the model that you find some of the disparities that that are bothersome, in terms of, sometimes we come into this and thinking, yes, we're going to get to have a participation in the regulatory voice, and we do, but somehow it's offensive to some when they see the regulated. Again, it's not a regulatory function structure, but the sort of regulated as also having a voice there. That is the particular model. That is the particular stakeholder model. But I have not. I guess I see these things as less of an limitation. I know money is a great thing. I'm constantly trying to find another contract outside the ICANN sphere so I can still make some money while doing, the half time to more that being a board member is, in a sustainable and supportable way. But I really do believe that the volunteers often have more time. There's something squeaking. It might be me. But that the volunteers often have more time to devote to some of these issues because of their retired status, or because they're an advocacy group where the advocacy group is fully funded by some foundation, and that foundation says, yes, we want you spending all your time working ICANN issues. And I've known people in that role. So I really think that those disparities are in a sense almost more apparent than they are pervasive, though I do know that it happens, and I do know that it is a genuine experience for many people.
Great,
But
thank you.
I also know people that are in advocacy organizations that are getting, fully supported to do whatever they think needs to be done at ICANN.
Great. I'm going to turn to Rudy. Rudy, let's try to unmute you again. You unmuted a second. It was a bit noisy. Try it again. Okay. Go ahead, Rudy. Rudy, I see you're unmuted. Give it another shot. Okay, we're having a problem with Rudy. Okay, he's muted again. Okay, Rudy, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Okay, I'm not sure what the issue is. It's not from this end. Let me see if I can promote you to moderator. Let's see if that'll make a difference.
Oh, I hear something.
A second ago, it was chirping, but I promoted him to moderator status to see if he can speak. But I'm not getting anything from Rudy. So, Rudy, give it another try. Oh, he's typing something. He may have a problem with his mic. This is an interesting tool. It has this. This is unfortunately bundled with Moodle. This is why we're using this. Yeah, no, Rudy, we are not hearing you. Give it another try.
Yeah, APC uses this one as well.
Yeah,
Which is the big blue button.
I use another tool, Big Pulse, is it? With GMAC and Zoom and all of them. I think Zoom is the best one of them all. But Rudy, give it another try. If not, please type in your comment. While he's doing that, Bill, did you have anything else to say that in response? Did your ideas come across the way you intended, or was there something else that Avri said that? Not to say you take exception to them. All you're doing is presenting a point of view.
No, I think I've covered it adequately. Thank you.
Okay, so folks, is there anyone else that wants to jump in? We did talk. There's a number of people from different parts of the world, and I thank you so much for staying up as late as you did. Early morning for many of you. Is there anyone else? Just indicate that you would like to jump into the conversation, and you can unmute your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Avri, for your very insightful presentation as always. So my question is regarding the multi-stakeholder model. So there is something that you mentioned, and I have never thought about it before. So you mentioned about that in an organization, there may be a possibility that its components are not multi-stakeholder. So it came a bit of confusing for me that if, for example, even hypothetically speaking, if an SO or AC is not multi-stakeholder, follows the multi-stakeholder model, then how can I claim to be a multi-stakeholder organization? I mean, isn't it a bit confusing that your components are not multi-stakeholder? Then how can your whole organization claims to be that? And even if you go one step beyond that at the end of every organization, there will be a board of director or a CEO or a chairman, and eventually the decision making will go to that person or the whole board. So I mean, it doesn't make total multi-stakeholderism. I think that's something we can never achieve. What do you think about that?
I guess I don't quite see it that way. But at its top level, it needs to be multi-stakeholder. In other words, all the organizations that participate in ICANN, in this example, are at a multi-stakeholder level. So in relation to ICANN, whether your government or your business or your civil society, be it user or be it organized civil society organization, those are all individual stakeholders. They all have their own structure. But when they're relating within the ICANN level, they need to be, participate in this multi-stakeholder model. None of them has an authority over any of the others. They are all, by definition, if not, as Bill was saying, by practice, equals. But each of those then can be seen as an atomic unit, and they are the units of the multi-stakeholder organization. However, when you dip into one of them, one of the ones I was thinking of, a simple example is stakeholder groups. In the GNSO, there are 4 stakeholder groups. The non-commercial stakeholder group has constituencies in it. None of the others do. So the others have, the commercial stakeholder group has 3 constituencies, but they don't really function as a stakeholder group. So, but they're still multi-stakeholder at that point. But they have component companies. Their members are companies perhaps, or they're individual lawyers. And they participate within those groups in whatever form they have self-determined to participate in. Within the registrars and registries, they may be corporations, they may be like core, more of an aggregation of companies working together with executive directors. If I look at APC, that's a member of the NCSG, it has an executive director, but it's run by its members. So each one of those is going to be very different. That doesn't mean that they can't participate as stakeholders in the next organization up. Now, my preference in the world is, yes, to go multi-stakeholder all the way down. And I'd love to see corporations that were multi-stakeholder and so on and so forth. But that's certainly not for me to determine. They have self-determined the kind of organization that they are. So yes, I believe that ICANN can be multi-stakeholder by treating its SOs and ACs all as equal stakeholders. Now, whether you look at the GNSO, I would say the GNSO is pretty much a multi-stakeholder organization, though certainly not one that's defined as one would, define ICANN, but it's got business, it's got civil society, it's got, it doesn't have governments, so it's not fully multi-stakeholder. That's the other thing about multi-stakeholder. Are you defining the stakeholders, again, looking at the cloud in the middle, in the government sense? Are you defining the stakeholders in some other sense? If it's a community and that community's being stakeholder, there's the various parts of the community, the people that work in the services, the people that work in the industries, the people that, are unemployed perhaps, would be the way you'd look at the division of the stakeholder groups. So while organizations, it's their own choice, the degree to which they themselves are multi-stakeholder to some extent internally, what really counts at the ICANN level are the groups that are members, not members, wrong word, but are the groups that are identified organizations that have, bottom-up oversight over this organization. Are they a multi-stakeholder assortment? And I would argue that they are, and then it can function. And one of the things that I find really remarkable about ICANN is it's one of the few that actually has an operational type of effect from within this multi-stakeholder model. Excuse me. But we're always then trying to figure out how to take things like the community and the organization, the org, and match them so that one is obviously a top-down organization. The staff is top-down and the community is bottom-up, and yet we find a way for them to work together more and more, even though there may at times be what I call, policy impedance mismatch in terms of, one of them being top-down and one of them being bottom-up. So there's some interesting issues to look at there, but we find a way to make it work. And the board ends up actually playing an assistive sense between those two at times. I see the board as a service thing, not as a boss thing. But so I don't know if that answers. Unfortunate, because I don't have cameras, or maybe fortunate, you don't see me waving my hands all over the place. And if you've ever seen me talk in person, you know that I'm doing that. But that basically, as I identified ICANN once, it is the most amazing crucible for this multi-stakeholder model. And not only should we be doing the work that we need to do for stability and security in the internet, we are doing amazing work in terms of developing this notion of multi-stakeholder running of a corporation and learning all the time.
Great, thank you. I was hoping Rudy could slip in and type in his comment, or maybe we can try one last time before we finish. Rudy, one last time. Do you want to try your audio again? Oh, okay. This is Rudy typing in. I've been a fellow at ICANN for some time. What I'd like to ask Avri, do you have an opinion on the use of HRIA, and again, you have to spell that out, across the governance model to improve the M14R and to activate civil society in the process? So unfortunately, you got a couple of minutes on this, but we'll wrap up with your response. Do you want me to repeat it, or you're okay?
No. And in fact, I was able to read it while you were doing.
Okay.
I actually I actually look forward to it. I look forward to seeing the considered analysis that come out of, you know, the implementation assessments. Actually, I'm not sure I'm getting the right words, but in terms of our human rights obligations, one of the things that we just added when we, you know, approved the WS2 recommendations was the dependence in part on looking at impact assessments. That's it, impact assessments of human rights in terms of the decisions we make. Now, one of the things we're still trying to develop is a framework within which the board can actually use them, and what are the board's requirements when looking at the human rights impact assessments. But yes, I see them as important. I look forward to seeing more of them. I think that, you know, they've got importance during the processes of developing recommendations, and I think they have importance at the end. They will never be the command module that sort of says impact and assessment says good, go with it. Impact assessment says bad, don't. But they'll certainly be important and valuable components in trying to make sure that when we're making decisions at the end of the day, we've looked at it. It's very much the same principle that comes out of the human rights protocol considerations group that I co-lead in the IRTF, which is human rights may not determine the design of a protocol. You may not be able to identify everything about it, but to have done an impact assessment is valuable. It's you know, it's a predictor of the future, and as such, it always remains a little cloudy, but it's a totally important consideration to take when you're making a decision. So yes, I think it's a good thing, and I look forward to seeing well-considered, well-structured, you know, human rights impact assessments.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. That was an entertaining session. And I just want to point out, Dale, can you please add your details on introduce yourself and what your background is into the participant list? And I think, Rudy, you've done that already, but I'm not sure. I'd have to double check that. But again, the idea of these calls, as well as the discussion through live chats and all, is to find out who's doing some interesting stuff. You got to remember, Avri comes as a dedicated person to the community. She comes in and she's not defending the flaws that ICANN has had. She's working through the system, and it's great to have somebody like Avri who's empathetic to the issues that we all share. So thank you again, Avri. This has been a great opportunity, and I always enjoy the time we spend together. So folks, next week, again, the time will be early, 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 1400 UTC. Eduardo Diaz will be talking nuts and bolts on the infrastructure system. So again, thank you all for coming today, and I'm sorry for the late time change, but I think it worked out well. We'll share the recording as soon as possible. Again, thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good luck with the rest of the course.
Thank you.